all of those factors, trying to see what's happening and what the trend is, go into our decision making. Because we have to make sure that we always have capacity, but we don't want to get too far ahead of it. Dr. Parker likes to talk about the whites of their eyes. When they see them, we want to be ready for them. So it's a bit of a juggling act. You don't want to get too far out over your skis, so to speak, but you also don't want to be in a position where you have kids going to class in portables for 2 or 3 years while you're getting caught up.
Pull up a chair, bring the vision you're chasing. Look over the blueprints, years in the making. From planning to progress and growth that will last. Come on, let's build and enable at the inside table. At the inside table.
Hey, my name's Tim. Thank you for clicking on this today and listening to us. We've just been happy to have conversations around real estate development and construction has been my passion for years. So here at Veritas, we're also passionate about that. And so what you're going to hear is just some general conversations that we've had about certain topics within this framework over the last several months. We hope you enjoy these. We hope you came to learn today. If you need some more information, we'll get you some information at the end of this as we close this thing out. But enjoy this conversation. We have a wonderful guest today. I'm looking forward to talking to Greg here a little bit more. Going to take us a little bit different direction today, I think, than we've gone the last few weeks and the last different discussions that we've had. But looking forward to your insight on some of this stuff that we've got today. So tell us a little bit about who you are, like introduce yourself and kind of how you got to where you are today. I know your journey is a lot different than some people to become the CFO of a school district, but please tell us how you got there.
Sure. Well, first of all, good to be with you today, Tim.
Thanks for being here.
Appreciate the invitation to join you. As a school official, a school administrator, which is how I view myself, which is a little bit differently from some other business leadership in schools. I came up, I guess what you would say, the traditional route. So classroom teacher, basketball coach, moving into building level administration, and then small school central office. Now, not large, but growing rapidly, suburban district at Mount Vernon in Fortville. So, when I started out as a chemistry teacher at Edgewood High School years and years ago, I probably didn't see myself in this position, but I think the management and kind of moving all the pieces that you get as a coach, I think probably opened my eyes to this maybe being a pathway for me ultimately. When I was at Shelbyville High School as an administrator, worked with a team that was very good about delegating based on strengths. And so, coordinating with the athletic department, coordinating with management or maintenance and custodial services, those types of things. I got a lot of early experiences that you don't necessarily get as a building administrator. And it was at that point, too, that my superintendent at the time gave me the opportunity to start working through the IASBO certification program. And so just a combination of their willingness to help me grow and me trying to find that pathway really got me a great opportunity at a small district north of Muncie, Blackford County schools. And to move from a building directly to assistant superintendent for finance operations doesn't happen that often. It certainly had to sacrifice to make the hour-and-a-half drive every day, but great opportunity and loved my time there. And then let's see, in the spring of 2019, right after, just a few months into our superintendent, Dr. Parker's tenure, the position became open and
closer to home.
Already living in Hancock County. One of my stops was at New Palestine schools along the way as coaching and teaching. So kind of came full circle and love every minute of it. It's a challenge, but again, going back to the athletics and sports analogy, it's kind of like problem solving or coming up with a strategy every day to just cope with whatever game or challenges you have ahead of you at the time.
Yeah. So great story. I knew you had the coaching background. I knew several stops along the way, but help us understand a little bit more on what you do every day. So as the chief financial officer of the school district, and you, as you said, you're in administration and one of the leaders there, help us understand what your job looks like.
So I see myself definitely in a leadership type position. And what I mean by that is schools, depending on their size, past practices, just simply the number of administrative positions they have, they will structure the finance side differently. So to smaller district, it might be more clerical, not to diminish those folks' roles, but they may not have the capacity to have someone in a leadership position focused solely on financing. Or even if they do, the expectation might be more to manage it again as a treasurer or maybe a step above a treasurer. I am blessed with a great treasurer and a great support staff. So I see my job really as managing the big ideas and
Okay.
making sure that I have the understanding, for instance, of the impact of legislation, how that's going to change, that I am keeping my eye on the ebb and flow of our cash from week to week, month to month. That I am staying in communication with agencies like State Board of Accounts, Department of Local Government Finance. So really, I am responsible for being the keeper of that specific knowledge because really it's to the point where it's so complicated and in the weeds that it's not fair to expect all the other administrative team members to understand things to that detail. The same way that I'm not going to be an expert, let's say, on special education.
Sure.
I can offer thoughts and support, but that's not my role.
Yeah. So maybe this is a good time to help our audience kind of understand a little bit more about how schools are actually funded, because you and I've had lots of conversations about this, and I've always appreciated your insight over lunch and different things that we've had an opportunity to do. But not everybody gets an opportunity to have that conversation.
Right.
So, could you briefly just, I mean, I don't, as simple as possible, talk to me like I'm 12, help me understand how schools are funded and in the state of Indiana?
So the first thing is it is not like your home finances where you can easily move from your Christmas fund to your savings fund to your checking to your credit card. Everything's pretty fungible and easily moves. We tend to work by statute, by law, in silos with some exceptions. So my capital dollars can't pay for someone's salary
Okay.
and with some exceptions
Sure.
like construction support, that type of thing. I'm not going to use my operational dollars that I need for utilities to hire a teacher. So that's the first thing. We have some real restrictions in terms of those silos or those pots of money. I think the first thing that's probably most surprising is on the education side, teachers, textbooks, secretaries, principals, that type of thing, what we call the education fund, that is managed and distributed solely by statute, the biennial, the 2-year budget approved by the General Assembly, and then administered and distributed by the Department of Education. It is based on essentially your enrollment.
Okay.
How many kids do you have on October 1st or middle of October and middle of February?
Okay.
Um,
So you get two payments throughout
yeah.
the year
So
for
there's
your
an
education.
and there's some other adjustments along the way. There's some other things blended into that, some special education dollars, some career training dollars, that type of thing. There's also a factor that is applied to each student because each student is worth a basic amount of dollars, and we call it the complexity, and it essentially takes into account um, the high risk, high stakes, poverty type issues. And there's a factor applied that may take you up a little bit or down a little bit, depending on your school's demographics. I mentioned that because um, I always say when we're talking about Mount Vernon schools, as a taxpayer, your Fortville dollar in that particular pot of money is just as likely to end up in Fort Wayne or Evansville as it is in
Because it's
Fortville.
going to the state general fund. Okay.
Exactly. And that is it's supported by income tax, sales tax, some excise tax, gambling tax, those
Okay.
type of things. On the other side of the ledger, you have the funds supported with local revenue. And for schools, as far as our ability to collect, that is entirely solely property taxes.
Okay.
So we cannot issue any kind of user tax. We don't have road and bridge taxes. We don't have hospitality tax. We don't have food and beverage, gasoline tax,
Sure.
nothing like that. It is strictly property tax revenues. Now
And
we
it's only a piece of the property tax
right.
revenue. So you only get a percentage of that property tax.
Correct. Now, typically, because of the way schools are funded, schools will often be the largest slice of the pie when you look at the breakdown of
Okay.
where all of your property taxes go to. But again, that's because most of the revenue on that side of the ledger is from property tax.
Okay.
If we had other means, then no doubt we would diversify
Sure.
and that slice would decrease. Um, there are other revenues that come in. So, for instance, some counties have a local income tax that, based on whatever statute or ordinance was in place when it was established, there can be some pass-through dollars from that to the schools, and we benefit from that in Hancock County. And then also some excise tax, some license renewals taxes, those kind of things. Relatively speaking, not a large amount, but they'll filter back towards us as well. Um, but again, property taxes, as we know from recent legislation,
Yeah.
Senate Enrolled Act 1, is a complicated picture. There's a lot of moving parts there. So it is not necessarily as straightforward as we have so many kids, each kid is worth so many dollars, this is how much revenue we'll have. There's a lot of ebb and flow and changes, and what one municipality might do impacts what another municipality is capable of doing. So it's a little more complicated.
If I could maybe interrupt you
Yeah.
briefly to kind of get some clarity on this. So basically, you have two sides of the ledger. You just talked about the educational side, and then you call it the operational side. So more of the operations. So the educational side is what gets distributed to every school district from the state general fund based upon some specific formula and how many kids you have. So I think you mentioned this, is you could have maybe the schools in Hamilton County, depending on where they are, all could get different numbers based upon, or different than Marion County schools, right? So whatever it is. And then you have this operational side, which comes from property taxes from your local district, right? From the people who live in that district. I live in Lawrence Township in Marion County, so we're paying into the Lawrence Township schools as part of our property tax bill. So where and how do capital projects, where do they come from? Are they more on the operational side? Are they more like, help us understand that?
So in most cases, depending on the cost, schools will finance capital projects through the sale of municipal bonds. And there are different kinds of bonds and different rules. We'll leave that for another
Sure.
discussion. But the repayment of those bonds, an amortization schedule, just like you have a mortgage repayment schedule, are going to be funded annually through those property taxes.
Okay.
So within the property tax side, you have the day-to-day operational things, and then you have the long-term capital projects. Or again, I tell our folks, think of it as your mortgage. The system tries to protect those dollars that you're collecting for your mortgage or your capital projects, protect it from any of the impacts that may occur because of, let's say, the constitutional caps based on property types, 1% for homeowners, 2% farmland, 3% commercial. Because depending on the structure of the local economy and taxes, you don't necessarily always collect everything that it says on paper because we have constitutional protections for taxpayers. So in order to make sure you fully collect what you need for obligations, that pot of money is treated differently.
Okay.
It's protected. And then the operational side is where you get a lot of the ebb and flow and adjustments and whatnot, because as a unit of government, we cannot default on our debt. That would be catastrophic, not just for us, but that would have ripple effects throughout the economy.
On August 13th, the Veritas Group is hosting the Insight Summit 2026 at the Alexander Hotel in downtown Indianapolis. This is a one-day in-person gathering designed for mayors, city and county officials, planners, engineers, economic development leaders, and community advocates who are actively shaping Indiana's future. The day is built around real-world insight from Veritas Group-led projects across the state, focusing on what's actually working in infrastructure, public space development, and economic growth. Whether you're driving capital projects, navigating growth challenges, or building strategic partnerships, attendees will leave with actionable insights, expanded networks, and a clearer vision for delivering lasting community impact. Learn more and register at theveritasgroup.com/insight.
Your district is growing, right?
Correct.
So Mount Vernon has been growing for the last several years, and I think if I heard Dr. Parker say this correctly, they're now the largest school district in Hancock County.
That's correct.
Okay, so you are the largest school district. We just had Dr. Olin in here on the podcast not too long ago. He was celebrating two things, by the way. He was celebrating Braylon Mullins hitting a shot against Duke, and he was also celebrating your guys' state championship in basketball because he's a Mount Vernon grad as well.
Absolutely.
So as Dr. Olin was talking about it and kind of thinking through capital projects from their perspective and kind of thinking through where you guys are, he's in a little bit different mode. And as they're kind of looking at regrading and restructuring as they're not necessarily growing, and maybe even in some cases their student numbers are being reduced year over year, where you guys are actively increasing, but yet your numbers that you're getting from the state and even your property taxes aren't going to be the same, right? So on a per student basis.
Right.
So, in the state of Indiana, there are obviously methods statutorily by how you have to go through maybe a referendum process or petition remonstrance or whatever that comes into play when you're looking at projects of certain sizes. But you guys as a growing district know you have needs in the future. How do you go about looking at that today, right? And thinking, okay, in 5 years, we're going to need this. In 10 years, we're going to need that. So what has to be true today to make those things a reality?
Well, the first thing that we watch closely and continue to update every 6 months, 12 months is our enrollment projection. And we've had a very good, thorough, comprehensive demographic study done recently that really digs into not just raw numbers, but what is likely to be developed on these sites and how many, for every new home, how many new students does that,
Sure.
Produce. For us, every new home is about 6/10 of a student, which sounds a little funny,
Okay.
but you think
Yeah.
of, well, if we have 1,000 new homes, then you can work backwards and do the math and say, well, that's how many students we're going to have. So we track the overall gross number anticipated growth, but then we also look closely at what we call a cohort. So if a kindergartner enters school in 2018, as they work their way through in that particular group of kindergartners, how is that group changing in numbers? Is it growing? Is it diminishing?
Yeah.
What happens when that group, because we have more than one elementary school, what does that look like when they hit junior high, for instance? Because that ties into the capacity of each individual building. And we look at, what is our ideal ratio of teachers to students? How is that different at elementary versus high school?
Yeah.
It's one thing if you have a high school band class with 100 kids versus an elementary school classroom with 28 or 29 kids. Completely different dynamics. All of those factors, trying to see what's happening and what the trend is, go into our decision making. Because we have to make sure that we always have capacity, but we don't want to get too far ahead of it. Dr. Parker likes to talk about the whites of their eyes. When they see them, we want to be ready for them. So it's a bit of a juggling act. You don't want to get too far out over your skis, so to speak, but you also don't want to be in a position where you have kids going to class in portables for 2 or 3 years while you're getting caught up. So that demographic data and that class cohort breakdown and tracking them is really the central part to our planning.
Okay.
And then after that, it simply becomes, you look at things like feasibility studies, you look at what is the current status of our facilities, what did we touch last? We have to prioritize maintaining what we have. We're big on stewardship. So yes, we might need new square footage, but hey, we also have to replace this HVAC system in an existing building. So it's a bit of a juggling act as well to prioritize. And finally, for us as a growing district, and this is something that not every district has to deal with, but it's literally securing property, land.
Sure.
We don't have any right now because we just did a massive project and it used up our
Yeah.
available land. So, and of course, in a hot market like Hancock County, it's not easy to come by because everyone wants to be there, commercial and residential. So, we have all of these kind of this different prongs of approaches going on simultaneously to prepare for the future.
I also know, I know you have at least one school that's kind of in the path of progress, right? In Hancock County. I drove by it every day. I grew up out there. I think you knew that. I lived not too far off of 300 when I was a child, and we would drive by that particular elementary school, every single day. And now it is right in the path of where all of these big logistics centers are going. And
Right.
so, how do you guys balance that, right? Because the cost to replace that building has got to be significantly more than you can even sell that ground for. But at the same time, you've got parents and families and young kids coming into a corridor that's becoming more heavily trafficked every single day. So, any thoughts on that?
So we've been fortunate to have a good relationship with our county government. They've supported us in doing things like restructuring the road frontage, to have acceleration decel lanes, help us expand turn lanes. We've done some work
Just get the
ourselves.
traffic off the
Yeah,
main
we've
road.
done some work to stack vehicles better to get them off the road. But when I moved to Hancock County 20 years ago, there was a four-way stop with a
That's right.
blinker light
I
and
know exactly what
and the
was there.
little bank that
That's right.
was Bonnie and Clyde's restaurant.
Yeah,
And who would have ever thought that which was kind of our far out
that's right.
building would be in
Yeah,
the center of this huge commercial
yeah.
area that Mount Comfort is now. So you're right. If we could hire a fleet of those industrial helicopters and pick it up and
Yeah,
place it somewhere, maybe we'd look into it. That's probably not going to
yeah,
happen.
probably not.
So I think what we have to do is, and this will probably be, for teams that succeed us, but we have to look at, okay, how does Mount Comfort fit into the overall growth in that part of the county? What might be a role for that building in the future? Where else we call it hotspots? Where are other
Sure.
hotspots to the south? Kind of interestingly, in our district, we have three municipalities. We have Town of Cumberland,
Yeah.
which is a unique situation
Yes.
and is growing rapidly. In fact, percentage-wise, it's our fastest growing
Really? I
municipality.
did not know that.
McCordsville, which has been the second or third fastest growing city in the state for several years now, and Fortville, which is a great little place, kind of a different approach, more of that
That's right.
village atmosphere, but folks don't realize how fast it's growing as well. And then, of course, with the rural part, the unincorporated, which has Mount
Yeah.
Comfort. So there's a lot of very different profiles depending on where you live in our district. And it's challenging because, to your point with Mount Comfort, we have to look at the future of that very differently than we do a
Yeah.
McCordsville, which is going to be more traditional residential.
Okay. If we could take a left turn here, you mentioned it already, SCA 1. So
Mhm.
Senate Enrolled Act 1. Almost every government official I've had in here, we've talked about this topic. And I think it's important for our legislatures to hear. I think it's important for our residents to hear this conversation because while it did pass some property tax relief for residents, and depending who you are, it could be a very important amount for you. It has done some potentially negative things to how government is funded and how schools are funded. Can you talk a little bit more specifically? You said you follow legislation, you mentioned it.
Mhm.
What did SCA 1 do to Mount Vernon, maybe specifically, and then maybe in general to schools in
Yeah.
general? Like help us understand that a little bit more.
How long do we have, Tim?
I know, Greg.
If obviously we're educators, and so we like to have very good collegial relationships with all of us because we're all in the
Sure.
same game
That's right.
together. But the fact remains is the Mount Vernon schools is unique among of the unique,
Tell us why.
because we are rapidly growing in terms of enrollment. We also then have a rapidly developing property tax base, commercial especially again, McCordsville's the hot
Right.
spot. So there's a lot going on. And while we love growth, growth is our lifeblood, growth is not cost free. And so for us, where we have been able to um, increase our revenues at a steady tax rate, because of that growth, now there are governors or restrictions on the value of the property being taxed. So, for instance, where we would have seen over the last few years a growth in the property values overall, the cumulative of 10 to 15%, now we're hoping for zero growth
Okay.
because zero is a win. And the reason that is, it is that the legislation is moving the residential deductions from a dollar amount to a percentage
Percentage.
amount.
Yeah.
So up to 2/3%, eventually by 2031. So we're the value. It's an algebra problem, right? I mean, if we have a fixed number of dollars that was a certain rate for a homeowner based on a value, well, if that value decreases because you're getting more deductions, your rate has to go up to get the same amount.
Right.
So it's also a messaging problem besides just a revenue issue. It's going to be hard for people to understand that because they're going to see a rate increase, even though they may not see an actual tax
Okay.
bill increase. But that's the biggest thing that how it's hitting us is we're not being able to tap into the true growth. So I'll give you a number. For instance, from 2017 through 2024, on average, 40% of the growth or the increase in property values in our district was due to new rooftops. Now, if you look statewide, that's an astronomically high percentage. There were school districts a few years ago where their property value growth was entirely due to reassessment. And that word reassessment is really what drove a lot of
Sure.
SCA one. We understand that. You know, you're in an area, especially post COVID, where the market's hot because the inventory is tight, and it drives everyone's home prices up. And even if your rate doesn't go up, your value does. Therefore, you pay more. We're completely sensitive to that, and we've talked a lot with our legislators and others at the General Assembly that we're all for some type of protection for those folks. For us, what we would like to see is an ability to tap into that true growth, maybe not even long term. And I'm politicking a little
So
bit
go
here,
ahead.
but it's our
It's
story.
your microphone.
It's our challenge. That growth does not come without a cost. Every new cul-de-sac is more hours on our bus, more idle time. Every stoplight is more idle time. Um, Again, it's our lifeblood, but it's not a zero cost proposition. And so that's where really what sets us apart, I think. And so we're looking at ways, and I think that there are folks that see that growing schools, and to be honest, there aren't a lot of us. We are definitely the minority.
Okay.
But growing schools have different needs, and that the SEA one model just doesn't quite fit the needs of those type of districts.
Okay. I appreciate that explanation because I think a lot of people get confused as to exactly how that affects it. I'm gonna add another layer onto
Sure.
this from just a different question because we deal with a lot of clients that are cities and towns that utilize TIF or tax increment financing a lot for projects. I know that the county in your district has used TIF on a lot of different things.
Right.
Um, from a school's perspective, and we've heard a lot of different discussions about this over the years, there are the people who are ready to take down TIF because it takes money away from schools and all these different things. From your perspective, talk to us about how, when you guys hear about another TIF project or another TIF being formed, what does that really do to a school when it comes to
Sure.
funding?
Well, just by definition, um, you're pulling potential property values out of the larger budget. So in other words, the farmland, and God love our farmers. I mean, we don't want to see their bill go up, but on a per acre basis, it's not a lot of
Sure.
revenue.
Right.
I mean, it's because it's appraising for $1,500 an acre
Right.
or whatever. So the farmland, in case of Hancock County, our district, is still going to be taxed, but for 2,000 acres, you're talking, and it sounds like a lot
Yeah.
on an individual basis, but for on a $100 million budget, it's
Right.
relatively small amount. So that's still going to flow. but it's that's the improvements on
that
that
you're not
property.
getting.
Right. And so essentially a TIF district still pays taxes depending on their abatement schedule,
Right.
which often goes hand
Sure.
in hand. But it's staying within that unit for infrastructure improvements.
Correct.
We are not opposed to TIF districts. We know that it has brought a lot of value to our district and our county. I think where the difference is maybe in years past where, and I say this respectfully, where it's been done maybe not always with the longest vision in mind,
Sure.
or maybe not always understanding, especially in Western Hancock County, how intricately woven all of the budgets are. And I have a quick story about
Please.
that.
Yeah.
To digress a moment, without getting too deep in the weeds, about 5 6 years ago, we had a fire territory come on board, which is a special tax supported
Yeah.
property taxes, and badly needed. Totally supported it, but we knew it was going to reduce our revenue.
Take some away from you
Right,
because
'cause
the
again,
levy's still the same.
yep,
Yeah.
because the pie can only be so big. In Western Hancock County, our budgets are so like this that New Palestine schools actually lost a couple $100,000 of revenue from a Vernon Township fire territory. So you can't pull one lever without it having a chain
Affecting everybody.
reaction. We don't operate in a vacuum.
Yeah.
Um, but back to the TIFs, I think where we're starting to see a change, and I give our local government a lot of credit for this. That they understand two things. Number one, a local TIF is going to impact local government. It impacts their county budget. But I also know that they want to be the decision makers.
Sure.
So instead of maybe letting land sit idly by and not being involved and not knowing who might come in, and we've seen examples of, for the lack of a better word, state TIFs in
Yep.
certain areas. They want to be proactive, get that established, and make local decisions. And what's changed now is we're having discussions about, okay, how can those be utilized to support schools or other local governments of unit, because we now realize, that's having an impact on those revenues.
Yeah. I think it's a great answer. I've been in this TIF space for the last 15 years, maybe more of our career here at Veritas, and we are constantly consulting with cities and towns and even school districts on this concept of TIF, teaching them how it works. We're not financial advisors, we're not attorneys,
Right.
but just from the basic concepts of a baseline plus the increment on top and what that really means for schools. And I think the biggest change was when they changed the school funding formula several years ago, which all of a sudden took all the pressure off of the schools to make sure that all their money was coming from one area, not
Correct.
the other. So I think that argument has become less and less over the years, but we still get people who just automatically assume that tiffing an area is taking money away from schools, when in fact, as you just stated, it doesn't necessarily take anything away. It just doesn't give you the added value of the new
Right.
stuff that could be coming. Sometimes which affects you, right? It could be multifamily. It could be other things that are
That's
being
right.
tiffed anymore, which could add students to your schools,
Right.
which could stretch your transportation and busing systems and whatever else. And so I think those considerations need to be talked about every time, but I do appreciate your insight on that. So
Yeah.
thank you for that.
Yeah.
I want to shift a little bit here as we kind of wrap this up a little bit. Let's talk about your leadership journey. Um, you mentioned you're a coach, a teacher, administrator, now kind of in the head office, superintendent's office, kind of leading a district. What have you learned along the way? I love leadership. I love talking about leadership with people. So help us understand maybe a few of the little things you've learned along the way of how you deal with people, whether it's from your coaching days, because I coach as well, as you know, and we certainly learn a lot from our coaching days and how we interact with kids and parents and athletes and everybody else, officials, etc. But how do you take some of those nuggets that you've learned along the way, and what would some of those nuggets be for us today?
Sure. Well, referring to my coaching days, as I am often quick to point out, I am the expert at what not to do. So that's the first thing. I think you can definitely learn from mistakes, or go back and say, wow, we could have done things better, and be in
Sure.
all seriousness, be willing to have that conversation. So that's the first thing. I think with where I'm at now, I understand what I do is very almost mystical, to some folks, right? I mean, it's like, okay, what does the CFO do? It's more than just his name being stamped on my paycheck, because of just all the things we've talked about. I, I think you've got to have those folks on your team that do carry that expert knowledge. So, for instance, Dr. Parker, and he will tell you he's a band teacher at heart, and I use his as an example that he has really committed to learning a lot in his time about all these different diverse areas as our superintendent. But there's no way that he himself or his team or his constituents can expect him to have the detail knowledge that I have the responsibility of knowing.
Sure.
And so I really see myself filling that role for our team. I have to be the one that gets in the weeds, that knows all the small details, and able to, and I think this is one strength I have, take the complex and make it understandable. And that's, I go back to my teaching days, teaching chemistry. Most of the kids coming in there are not going to be science majors. They're not going to work at Lilly. They are checking a box, and they might like
Sure.
to do it. They might like some of it, but they're checking a box. And so how can we make this digestible for them so that they get something out of it? And that's always the same way with the basketball and the coaching. Not every player is going to play college. Not every player is going to have a lot of big statistics, but they want to contribute. They want to know what their role is. How can we distill this down and give them a role? So I think that's my strength, and I have no desire to be in the superintendency position. I'm not a people person in that sense, but I have taken great pride in being that source of expert knowledge, because I think you have to have that the same way a football coach has coordinators, right?
Yeah.
There's an area of expertise that you rely on.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I think sometimes leaders feel like they need to know everything and do everything all the time, when in fact, I think sometimes we're just called to know and be specific about that one thing in that moment. So I appreciate that mindset and that philosophy. I also appreciate that you're an expert at doing the wrong things. I have been there. I am there. I feel like no matter what, I'm always learning something new. And I feel like the first couple of times that I'm doing it, it's probably not the right or the best way to do it. So we're trying to learn through those things. So, hey, thank you for taking the time today. I am going to probably follow up with a couple more questions,
Sure.
but certainly really appreciate you being here. So thanks for coming over today and spending some time with us on our podcast.
I've enjoyed it very much.
Awesome.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Greg. Hey, thanks for listening today. Thanks for clicking on this and diving in a little bit deeper. We hope you learned something today. And if you did, or you want more information, please reach out to us. We'll be happy to connect you with the right people to get you the answers that you need. But really help you leave with one thing in mind, is that our goal here at Veritas is to renew communities through great projects and great people. I think all of these conversations have shown that in some way or another. So thanks for listening today, and catch up with us next time.